The research station on Kepler 442b hummed with activity as Dr. Elena Vasquez made her final rounds through the alien wildlife facility. Her boots echoed against the metallic floors as she approached the containment unit that housed their most dangerous specimen, a Nexari huntress and her 3 cubs. The creature was massive, standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder with midnight black fur marked by bioluminescent stripes that pulsed with her emotional state. Her species had evolved as apex predators on a world where everything wanted to kill everything else. Elena paused at the reinforced viewing window, watching the mother Nexari pace restlessly while her cubs played nearby. The alien's 6 legs moved with fluid grace, each paw equipped with retractable claws that could slice through steel. Her elongated skull housed 4 eyes, 2 forward-facing for hunting, 2 on the sides for detecting ambush predators. When she turned toward Elena, those alien eyes held an intelligence that made the scientist's breath catch. This wasn't just an animal. This was a thinking, feeling being. The evacuation order had come 3 days ago. A massive solar storm was approaching the system, one that would bombard the planet with lethal radiation for months. Every human facility was shutting down, every research project abandoned. The company executives had been clear. Only essential personnel and valuable research data would be evacuated. Everything else, including the alien specimens, would be left behind. Elena's hands trembled as she reviewed the abandonment protocols on her tablet. According to the company's cold calculations, the Nexari family wasn't worth the transport costs. They consumed too much food, required specialized containment, and posed too great a risk during transport. The recommendation was simple: euthanize the specimens before departure to prevent them from suffering a slow death from radiation poisoning. But Elena couldn't bring herself to do it. She'd spent 2 years studying these creatures, documenting their complex social behaviors and remarkable intelligence. The mother, whom Elena had named Shadow, had learned to recognize individual humans and had even attempted to communicate through a series of chirps and body language. The cubs, Storm, Nova, and Twilight, were playful and curious, showing the same problem-solving abilities as Earth's great apes. As Elena watched, Shadow approached the viewing window and placed one massive paw against the transparent aluminum. Her bioluminescent stripes shifted from agitated orange to a soft blue, a color Elena had come to associate with sadness or longing. It was as if the Nexari knew what was coming. The facility's automated systems would maintain life support for exactly 72 hours after the last human departed. After that, the power would shut down. The air recyclers would stop and the containment units would automatically open. The company's official reasoning was to give the animals a chance to find shelter in the wild, but everyone knew the truth. No Earth creature could survive the radiation levels that were coming, and they assumed the same was true for the Nexari. Elena made her decision in that moment. She couldn't save Shadow and her cubs from the radiation, but she could at least ensure they died free. Working quickly, she began overriding the containment protocols, programming the system to open all the enclosures the moment the power failed. If they were going to die, they would die on their own terms, not trapped in cages. As she worked, Shadow continued to watch her, those 4 alien eyes tracking every movement. Elena whispered soft words of apology, though she knew the Nexari couldn't understand English. What broke her heart most was that Shadow seemed to understand anyway. The alien mother's stripes had shifted to a deep purple, a color Elena had only seen once before, when one of the cubs had been injured and Shadow thought she might lose him. The final transport lifted off at dawn, carrying the last of the human researchers away from Kepler 442b. Elena pressed her face to the small porthole, watching the research facility grow smaller below them. Somewhere in that complex, a Nexari family was beginning their final days, unaware that their cage doors were programmed to open in just over 70 hours. As the planet disappeared behind them, Elena made a silent promise. If humanity ever returned to Kepler 442b, she would come back to honor the memory of the creatures they had abandoned. It was the least she could do for the family. She had been forced to leave behind. Little did Elena know that her act of mercy would set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of human understanding about intelligence, survival, and what it truly meant to be alive in a hostile universe. Shadow and her cubs were about to prove that evolution on an alien world had produced capabilities that human science had never imagined possible. 73 hours after the last human transport departed, the lights in Research Complex Delta 7 flickered once and died. Emergency power lasted another 6 minutes before the facility plunged into complete darkness. In the alien wildlife section, magnetic locks disengaged with soft clicks as containment doors slid open for the first time in 2 years. Shadow emerged from her cage cautiously, her bioluminescent stripes providing the only light in the darkened corridor. Her 4 eyes had evolved for the perpetual twilight of her homeworld, making the darkness less of a hindrance than it would be for human vision. Behind her, the 3 cubs tumbled out excitedly, finally free to explore beyond their small enclosure. The Nexari family spent their first hours of freedom investigating the facility. Shadow's keen senses mapped every corridor, every room, every potential threat or resource. Her species had evolved as both hunters and survivors on a world where environmental catastrophes were commonplace. What humans saw as certain death, Shadow recognized as just another challenge to overcome. The first sign that something was wrong came 12 hours later. Storm, the smallest of the cubs, began showing symptoms that Shadow had never seen before. His stripes flickered weakly, his movements became sluggish, and strange burns began appearing on his exposed skin. The radiation was beginning to take its toll. But as Shadow examined her cub, something extraordinary happened. Her own stripes began to glow brighter, shifting through colors that had never been documented by human researchers. Deep within her alien physiology, dormant genetic sequences were activating, evolutionary adaptations that her species had developed over millions of years of survival on a world bombarded by cosmic radiation. The Nexari homeworld orbited a highly active star that regularly bathed the planet in lethal radiation. Over evolutionary time, the species had developed not just resistance to radiation, but the ability to metabolize it. The process was triggered only in extreme circumstances, when normal food sources were unavailable and radiation levels were high enough to activate specific genetic pathways. Shadow's transformation began slowly. Her already impressive 6-legged frame began to grow larger, her muscle mass increasing as her body converted ambient radiation into usable energy. Her bioluminescent stripes evolved into something more complex, a biological radiation detector and converter that could absorb harmful energy and transform it into nutrients. The cubs, being younger and more adaptable, changed even faster. Within days, their playful tumbling had become something more purposeful as they learned to control their new abilities. Nova discovered she could see radiation as visible light, turning the deadly invisible killer into something beautiful and navigable. Twilight developed the ability to project concentrated bursts of bioluminescence that could neutralize radioactive particles in a localized area. As the solar storm intensified over the following weeks, the Nexari family didn't just survive, they thrived. The abandoned research facility became their playground as they explored every level, every hidden passage, every abandoned piece of equipment. Shadow's enhanced intelligence, now boosted by her radiation-fueled transformation, began to understand the human technology around her. She learned to operate basic controls, discovered food storage areas, and even figured out how to reactivate certain systems by understanding the facility's power flow patterns. The cubs, with their enhanced cognitive abilities, became even more curious and inventive. They began to experiment with the abandoned research equipment, inadvertently learning about human science and technology. Meanwhile, the radiation levels outside continued to climb far beyond what human scientists had predicted. The solar storm was proving to be one of the most intense on record, turning the planet's surface into what should have been a lifeless wasteland. But for the Nexari family, it was an abundant feast of energy that made them stronger with each passing day. Shadow began to understand that the humans had intended to abandon her family to death. The realization filled her with something that might have been anger, but was tempered by gratitude toward the one human, Elena, whose scent still lingered in the facility and who had clearly been responsible for their freedom. As weeks turned into months, the Nexari family's transformation continued. They were becoming something new, something that had never existed before, a hybrid of their natural evolution and the extreme conditions of their new environment. They were adapting not just to survive, but to master their new world. What the humans had intended as a death sentence was becoming the greatest gift the Nexari could have received. They were evolving in real time, becoming more than they had ever been before. And deep in Shadow's increasingly complex mind, plans were beginning to form. Plans that would eventually bring her face to face with the species that had abandoned her family to die. 6 months after the abandonment, the Nexari family had transformed the empty research facility into something unprecedented. Shadow, now nearly twice her original size and crackling with bioluminescent energy, had become something between a scientist and a technological savant. Her radiation-enhanced intelligence had unlocked cognitive abilities that allowed her to understand human technology at an intuitive level. The cubs had grown into magnificent specimens, each developing unique specializations. Storm had become the family's engineer, his 6 nimble limbs perfect for manipulating delicate equipment. Nova served as their sensor array, her evolved vision capable of seeing across multiple spectrums simultaneously. Twilight had developed into their guardian, able to project defensive energy fields that could neutralize both radiation and physical threats. Working together, they had accomplished something that human scientists said was impossible. They had restored power to sections of the facility, using their own bioelectric abilities as living generators. Shadow had learned to interface directly with the facility's computer systems, her bioluminescent patterns serving as a natural programming language that the quantum processors somehow understood. Through the facility's still functioning deep space communication array, Shadow began to intercept human transmissions. Her enhanced intelligence allowed her to decode human languages with startling speed. She learned about human culture, their fears, their ambitions, and most importantly, their assumption that her family was long dead. The transmissions revealed something that filled Shadow with cold determination. The humans were planning to return to Kepler 442b once the radiation levels dropped to what they considered safe levels. They intended to harvest the rare minerals that the radiation storm had created, minerals that were now embedded throughout the planet's crust and that her family had learned to sense and manipulate. But more disturbing were the corporate communications discussing the failed xenobiology project and the acceptable losses of specimen disposal. Shadow realized that her family hadn't been abandoned due to emergency necessity. They had been deliberately sacrificed because corporate executives considered them expendable. The revelation triggered something primal in Shadow's enhanced psyche. Her species had evolved complex concepts of loyalty, justice, and retribution. The humans had violated the most sacred trust by abandoning cubs to die, and in Nexari culture such an act demanded response. Shadow began to prepare. Using her newfound understanding of human technology combined with her species' natural abilities, she started constructing something extraordinary. The abandoned research equipment became the foundation for a technological marvel that blended human engineering with Nexari biological innovation. She created living machines, biotechnological constructs that could grow, adapt, and evolve. Storm helped her build communication devices that could broadcast across interstellar distances. Nova designed detection systems that could track human ships from light years away. Twilight developed defensive systems that could protect their facility from any conceivable human weapon. As the months passed, the Nexari family's capabilities grew exponentially. They learned to cultivate the radiation-enhanced minerals, growing crystalline structures that could store and focus energy in ways that human science had never imagined. They developed living spacecraft capable of interstellar travel, ships that fed on cosmic radiation and grew stronger during long journeys. The facility itself became a hybrid organism, part building and part creature, sustained by the family's bioelectric fields and defended by living metal that could reshape itself in response to threats. The abandoned research station had evolved into something that was simultaneously a fortress, a laboratory, and a nursery for technologies that existed nowhere else in the known galaxy. Shadow's intelligence continued to expand, fed by the constant radiation that human scientists had assumed would be lethal. She began to understand concepts that challenged the fundamental assumptions of human science. Energy and matter were more fluid than humans realized. Consciousness could exist in forms that biological chauvinism had never considered. Evolution could be directed through will and necessity rather than random mutation. The cubs, now nearly adult, had developed abilities that bordered on the miraculous. They could communicate across vast distances through quantum entanglement. They could manipulate matter at the molecular level through focused bioelectric fields. They could survive in the vacuum of space, feeding on cosmic radiation and solar wind. As the second year of abandonment began, Shadow made her final preparations. The humans would return eventually, expecting to find a dead world ready for exploitation. Instead, they would encounter something that would challenge every assumption they held about intelligence, survival, and the nature of life itself. The Nexari family was no longer just a collection of abandoned specimens. They had become the harbingers of a new kind of existence, one that proved intelligence could arise in forms that human xenobiology had never considered possible. They were living proof that evolution could accelerate under pressure, that consciousness could transcend biological limitations, and that the universe was far more wondrous and terrifying than any human had dared imagine. Shadow's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with anticipation as she monitored human communications. Soon, very soon, the species that had abandoned her family would return, and when they did, they would discover that their greatest mistake wasn't leaving the Nexari to die. It was underestimating what the Nexari were capable of becoming when they chose to live. 3 years after the abandonment, the corporate mining fleet arrived at Kepler 442b with great fanfare and ambitious plans. The radiation storm had finally subsided, leaving behind a planet rich in exotic materials created by the intense energy bombardment. Corporate executives aboard the flagship were already calculating profits from the rare isotopes and crystalline formations they expected to harvest. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the research vessel Prometheus, her heart heavy with guilt as she watched the planet grow larger in the viewports. She had fought for 3 years to be included in the return expedition, driven by her promise to honor the memory of the Nexari family she had been forced to abandon. The company had only agreed to bring her because they needed her expertise to catalog any surviving specimens for their xenobiology division. The initial surveys showed results that puzzled the expedition scientists. The abandoned research facility was not only intact but seemed to be actively maintained. Power readings indicated that someone or something was operating advanced technology within the complex. Most disturbing of all, there were massive energy signatures scattered across the planet's surface. Signatures that didn't match any known human technology. Elena volunteered for the first survey team, unable to stay away from the place where she had made her most difficult decision. As their shuttle descended toward the facility's landing pad, she noticed that the building itself looked different. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint organic rhythm, and crystalline growths extended from the original structure like technological coral. The moment Elena's team set foot on the landing pad, they knew they were being watched. Sensors detected movement throughout the facility, but no visual contact was made. The team's attempts to enter through the main airlock were blocked, not by locked doors, but by what appeared to be living metal that had grown over the entrances. Elena approached one of the sealed doorways and placed her hand against the strange metallic surface. To everyone's amazement, the material responded to her touch, rippling like liquid before slowly parting to create an opening. Someone or something had recognized her biometric signature and was granting her access while excluding the rest of the team. Inside the facility, Elena found herself in a wonderland of impossible technology. The corridors had been transformed into something between architecture and organism. Bioluminescent veins pulsed through living walls that seemed to breathe with their own rhythm. The air itself felt alive, charged with energy that made her skin tingle. As Elena explored deeper into the facility, she began to hear them, soft, chirping sounds that she remembered from her research years ago. But these vocalizations were more complex now, carrying harmonics and modulations that suggested advanced communication. When she rounded the corner into what had once been the main laboratory, Elena came face to face with the impossible. Shadow stood in the center of the room, but she was no longer the creature Elena remembered. The Nexari matriarch had grown magnificent, her form crackling with controlled energy that made the air shimmer around her. Her 4 eyes fixed on Elena with an intelligence that was unmistakably sapient, and her bioluminescent stripes shifted through colors that conveyed complex emotions, recognition, gratitude, and something that might have been forgiveness. The cubs, now fully grown, emerged from the shadows around the room. Storm's body had evolved into something like a living computer, his nervous system interfacing directly with the hybrid technology that filled the chamber. Nova's eyes had become like stars, capable of seeing across dimensions that human science had only theorized about. Twilight radiated a protective energy that made Elena feel simultaneously safe and humbled. Shadow approached Elena slowly, her movements graceful despite her impressive size. When she was close enough, the Nexari matriarch did something that brought tears to Elena's eyes. She pressed her massive head against Elena's chest in a gesture of recognition and acceptance. Through some means Elena couldn't understand, emotions flooded her mind, gratitude for the freedom Elena had given them. Understanding of the difficult choice Elena had been forced to make. And something else, a sense of anticipation, as if Shadow had been waiting specifically for Elena's return. Communication came through direct neural interface, Shadow's evolved consciousness touching Elena's mind with thoughts that translated themselves into human concepts. Shadow showed Elena what they had become, what they had built, what they had learned. The facility was no longer just a building but a living entity, a hybrid of Nexari biotechnology and human engineering that had evolved far beyond what either species could have created alone. Shadow revealed their true purpose in surviving. They had not just adapted to the radiation, they had learned to control it, to shape it, to use it as a tool for creation rather than destruction. The energy signatures scattered across the planet's surface were their gardens, places where they were growing new forms of life that could thrive in any environment, on any world. Elena realized with growing awe that the Nexari family hadn't just survived their abandonment. They had used it as an opportunity to transcend their original limitations. They had become living bridges between technology and biology, between energy and matter, between what was and what could be. But Shadow's communications carried a warning as well. The human mining fleet posed a threat to the delicate ecosystems the Nexari had cultivated. The corporate plans to strip mine the planet would destroy years of careful work and eliminate life forms that existed nowhere else in the universe. Elena understood that she was being given a choice. She could return to her ship and report that the planet was uninhabitable, protecting the Nexari family's work but lying to her own species. Or she could tell the truth and risk a conflict between human ambition and Nexari ingenuity. As Elena stood in that impossible chamber, surrounded by technology that redefined the boundaries of life itself, she realized that the decision she was facing would determine not just the fate of the Nexari family, but the future relationship between two species that had far more potential together than either could achieve alone. Elena's return to the corporate fleet created an uproar that echoed through every level of the expedition hierarchy. Her initial report of significant anomalous activity requiring immediate investigation had been vague by necessity, but the biosensor readings she brought back told a story that corporate executives refused to believe. The facility was not just occupied, it was thriving with life forms that registered as both organic and technological. Energy readings suggested power generation capabilities that exceeded anything in human space. Most troubling of all, Elena's neural scans showed evidence of direct mind-to-mind contact with an intelligence that the computer systems couldn't classify. Corporate Security Director Marcus Chen dismissed Elena's findings as radiation-induced hallucinations. The mining operation would proceed as scheduled, and any potential threats would be neutralized through standard protocols. Chen authorized a full military assault on the facility, convinced that they were dealing with either hostile aliens or rogue human colonists using stolen technology. Elena pleaded desperately for more time to establish peaceful communication, but her arguments fell on deaf ears. The corporate board had invested too much in this expedition to be deterred by what they considered scientific fantasies. The attack was scheduled for dawn, giving the assault teams time to prepare, their heavy weapons and energy shields. What the human military forces didn't understand was that Shadow and her family had been monitoring their communications since the moment the fleet arrived. Every tactical discussion, every strategic plan, every weapon specification had been intercepted and analyzed by intelligences that could process information at speeds that made human thought seem glacially slow. Shadow called her family together in the facility's central chamber, their bioluminescent patterns creating a complex light show that served as their discussion medium. They could easily defend themselves. Their evolved abilities made human weapons largely ineffective, and their biotechnology could disable the corporate fleet systems with minimal effort. But Shadow had learned something important during her years of studying human transmissions. Humanity was not a monolithic species. There were individuals like Elena who valued life and understanding over profit and control. There were scientists who sought knowledge rather than exploitation. There were philosophers who dreamed of cooperation between different forms of consciousness. The attack that would come in the morning was not the action of all humanity, but of a small group of humans who represented the worst aspects of their species: greed, arrogance, and the willingness to destroy what they couldn't understand. Shadow realized that how she responded to this attack would determine whether humanity's future contact with advanced alien intelligence would be guided by its best representatives or its worst. Elena spent the night in her quarters, knowing that she had failed to prevent a catastrophe that could define human-alien relations for generations. She had tried to contact Shadow using the neural interface techniques she had learned, but the connection remained frustratingly one way. She could sense the Nexari family's presence, could feel their preparations for the coming conflict, but she couldn't communicate her desperate desire to find a peaceful solution. As dawn approached, the assault teams prepared their equipment with military precision. Heavy plasma cannons were positioned to breach the facility's walls. Electromagnetic pulse generators were ready to disable any technological defenses. Capture nets designed for dangerous predators were loaded into deployment drones. The attack began at sunrise with a coordinated bombardment of the facility's outer walls. The humans expected their weapons to punch through reinforced metal and concrete. Instead, they watched in amazement as the building's surface rippled like liquid, absorbing the energy blasts and converting them into bioluminescent displays that pulsed through the structure. Shadow emerged from the facility with calm dignity, her 3 offspring flanking her in a formation that spoke of coordination rather than aggression. The Nexari family stood in the open courtyard, making no threatening moves while human weapons charged to fire again. Elena broke from the command group and ran toward the confrontation, shouting for the soldiers to hold their fire. Security Director Chen ordered her arrest, but Elena's desperate run across the battlefield had already served its purpose. Shadow's attention focused on the one human who had shown her family kindness, and in that moment of connection, everything changed. Nova's evolved vision suddenly revealed the quantum signatures that connected all conscious minds in the immediate area. Storm's technological interface accessed the neural implants that allowed the human soldiers to coordinate with their weapons. Twilight's protective fields expanded to encompass both human and Nexari. Positions. What happened next would be recorded in corporate security logs as a massive systems failure of unknown origin. But Elena experienced it as something far more profound. Every human in the assault force suddenly found themselves sharing consciousness with the Nexari family. For a brief, overwhelming moment, 2 species experienced the universe through each other's perspectives. The human soldiers felt what it was like to perceive energy as a living thing, to communicate through patterns of light that conveyed emotional nuance impossible in spoken language, to exist as part of a family bond that transcended individual survival. The Nexari experienced human concepts of curiosity, the drive to explore and understand, the capacity for individuals to make moral choices that contradicted group pressure. When the shared consciousness ended, both species stood changed. The human assault force lowered their weapons, not in surrender, but in recognition that they had been about to destroy something precious beyond calculation. Shadow and her family maintained their peaceful stance, but their bioluminescent patterns now carried new colors, hope mixed with caution. Elena found herself standing between 2 groups of beings who had just discovered that consciousness could bridge any gap. No matter how vast the differences in biology or culture, the moment of shared understanding had lasted only seconds, but it had planted seeds that would grow into something unprecedented in galactic history. The aftermath of the consciousness-sharing event sent shockwaves through both human and Nexari understanding of what was possible between species. Security Director Chen attempted to maintain military protocol, insisting that the experience had been some form of alien mind control, but his own soldiers contradicted him. They had felt the genuine emotions of beings who harbored no malice toward humanity, only a desire to protect their family and their life's work. Elena found herself appointed as humanity's first xenological ambassador, a role that existed nowhere in corporate hierarchy, but had become essential for species survival. The brief mental contact had shown her glimpses of Nexari capabilities that redefined her understanding of what intelligence could accomplish. They weren't just advanced, they had discovered ways to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality that human science insisted were impossible. Shadow's response to the failed attack demonstrated wisdom that impressed even the most skeptical corporate executives. Rather than retaliate or demand the humans leave, she offered to share knowledge that could benefit both species. The mining operation could continue, but under Nexari guidance that would ensure the planet's continued habitability while extracting resources in ways that enhanced rather than destroyed the local ecosystem. The demonstration that followed became known as the Kepler transformation. Working together, human technology and Nexari biotechnology began reshaping the mining operation into something unprecedented. Storm interfaced directly with human computers, teaching them to think in ways that bridged digital logic and organic intuition. Nova's enhanced perception guided mining, equipment to extract resources while simultaneously nurturing the radiation-evolved life forms that had become the planet's new ecosystem. Twilight's protective abilities proved most valuable in establishing trust between the species. Her energy fields could create safe spaces where humans and Nexari could interact without fear of accidental harm. More importantly, her empathic abilities allowed her to sense and communicate emotional states across species boundaries, making her an invaluable translator for concepts that had no equivalent between human and Nexari languages. Elena spent her days learning directly from Shadow, their neural link becoming more sophisticated as both species adapted to cross-consciousness communication. Through Shadow's memories, Elena experienced the Nexari homeworld, a place of constant environmental challenge where cooperation between individuals was essential for survival. She understood why the abandonment had been so traumatic, not just as abandonment of individuals, but as a violation of the fundamental principle that protected beings never abandoned family. The corporate board's initial resistance crumbled when the first resource shipments arrived at human space stations. The materials weren't just extracted, they had been enhanced through Nexari biotechnology to possess properties that made them more valuable than anything humans had previously discovered. Metals that could self-repair, crystals that could store vast amounts of energy, organic compounds that could adapt their chemical properties to specific needs. More importantly, the Nexari-guided extraction process was actually improving the planet's environment rather than damaging it. Areas that had been lifeless rock were transformed into thriving ecosystems that supported both Earth-based and Nexari-evolved life forms. The planet was becoming a garden world that could support multiple species while providing resources for interstellar trade. The cubs, now fully mature, began developing specializations that complemented human abilities in unexpected ways. Storm became the interface between human computers and Nexari biotechnology, creating hybrid systems that thought in ways neither species could achieve alone. Nova's perception abilities revolutionized human understanding of space navigation and stellar phenomena. Twilight's protective fields enabled human exploration of environments that had previously been lethal. As months passed, the partnership evolved into something deeper than mere cooperation. Human scientists working alongside Nexari biotechnology began developing capabilities they had never imagined possible. Elena herself underwent gradual changes as her neural interface with Shadow became more sophisticated, her consciousness expanding to encompass concepts that purely human thinking couldn't grasp. The first interstellar message from the Kepler 442b colony shocked the human, government, and corporate leadership throughout known space. Elena's report described not just successful contact with alien intelligence, but the emergence of a hybrid civilization that was advancing both species beyond their individual limitations. Shadow's final communication to Elena carried a message that would reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. The Nexari had been monitoring radio transmissions from Earth for decades, learning about human culture and capabilities. They had seen the potential for both greatness and destruction in humanity's rapid technological development. The abandonment hadn't been humanity's greatest failure. It had been the catalyst for humanity's greatest opportunity. By forcing the Nexari to evolve beyond their original limitations, humans had inadvertently created the perfect partners for their own next evolutionary step. The universe was vast and filled with wonders and dangers that neither species could face alone. But together, human curiosity and innovation, combined with Nixari wisdom and biotechnology, could open paths to discoveries that would benefit all conscious life in the galaxy. Elena's final report to Earth carried more than just scientific data. It carried proof that intelligence could transcend the boundaries of biology, that cooperation could achieve what competition never could, and that humanity's greatest strength lay not in conquering the universe alone, but in finding their place within the larger community of conscious beings that filled the cosmos. The abandoned alien jaguar and her cubs had indeed shocked everyone, but not through death and destruction. They had shocked both species by proving that even the worst mistakes could become the foundation for unprecedented cooperation, understanding, and shared growth among the stars.